Everyone in the room thought it was going to be funny. A loud, overconfident man stood in the center, smirking, chest puffed out, enjoying the attention. And right in front of him stood Steven Seagal, calm, quiet, almost invisible. No flashy clothes. No bodyguards. No attitude. Just a man standing still, watching. The crowd had already decided who was weak and who was strong. The man laughed and said loudly, "Seriously? This guy? You expect me to be scared of him?" People chuckled. Someone whispered, "He doesn't even look dangerous." Steven didn't respond. That silence made the man even bolder. He stepped closer, invading Steven's space, pointing a finger at his chest. "You know what your problem is," he sneered. "You look like someone who's never been in a real fight." Steven raised his eyes slowly. Cold. Focused. Unreadable. But still, he said nothing. And that was the moment the mistake was made. Because the man didn't understand something very important. Steven's silence wasn't fear. It was control. The crowd mistook calm for weakness. Stillness for surrender. The man laughed again, louder this time, feeding off the attention. He turned to the people around him and said, "Watch this. I'll teach him a lesson he won't forget." Some people felt uneasy. Others leaned in, expecting entertainment. Steven shifted his weight slightly. That tiny movement went unnoticed. The man shoved him. Not hard, just enough to humiliate him. Gasps echoed through the room. Steven took one step back. Then stopped. The man grinned, convinced he had won. "See," he said. "Told you. He's nothing." But what no one saw was Steven's hands. Relaxed. Perfectly positioned. Ready. In that split second, something changed in the air. Steven's posture straightened. His breathing slowed. His eyes locked onto the man with surgical focus. This wasn't anger. It was calculation. The man opened his mouth to speak again, but never got the chance. Because the Steven Seagal standing there now was not the quiet man they had been laughing at. This was someone else entirely. Someone trained. Someone precise. Someone brutal. And in just a few seconds, everyone in that room was about to realize one terrifying truth. They hadn't been watching a weak man getting bullied. They had been watching a predator, deciding when to strike. And once that decision was made, there was no stopping what came next. What most people didn't know was this. Steven Seagal hadn't come there looking for trouble. It was supposed to be an ordinary stop. A normal place. A normal moment. The kind of place where egos walk in before people do. The room was crowded, loud, full of chatter and clinking glasses. Conversations overlapped, laughter bounced off the walls, and no one was really paying attention to anyone else, until he decided to make himself the center of it all. The man who would soon regret everything. He was already in a bad mood. You could tell by the way he spoke to people, sharp words, louder than necessary. He leaned against the counter like he owned the place, shoulders wide, chin raised, enjoying how people moved out of his way. To him, dominance wasn't earned. It was taken. Then Steven walked in. No announcement. No pause in the noise. Just a quiet presence slipping into the room. Simple jeans. Worn jacket. Hands relaxed at his sides. He didn't scan the room like a threat. He didn't carry himself like someone important. And that's exactly why he was chosen. The man noticed him almost immediately, not because Steven stood out, but because he didn't. The calm ones always get tested first. He nudged his friend and nodded toward Steven. "Look at that guy," he laughed. "Looks like he wandered into the wrong place." His friends smirked. Someone muttered, "Easy target." Steven heard it, but he didn't react. He stepped forward, calmly, as if none of it mattered. He stood near them, waiting his turn, eyes steady, posture loose. That calm made the man uncomfortable. And when insecure people feel uncomfortable, they get loud. "Hey," the man called out. "You lost or something?" The room quieted slightly. A few heads turned. Steven glanced over. "No," he said simply. "That was it." One word. But somehow, it felt like an insult. The man laughed sharply. Wow. Real tough guy, huh? Steven said nothing. Have you ever seen someone mistake calmness for weakness? Type yes or no in the comments. The man stepped closer now, crossing a line that didn't belong to him. You know, he continued, people like you always act quiet until someone puts you in your place. Steven looked at him, calm as ever. Everyone has a place, Steven replied. That should have been the end of it. But egos don't stop when they're warned. The man scoffed. Oh yeah. And where's your place? Steven didn't answer. The silence stretched. Heavy. Uncomfortable. People around them sensed something was off. A woman near the back frowned. A bartender slowed his movements. Even the laughter had faded. The man mistook that silence for victory. He leaned in closer, invading Steven's space, voice low now, dangerous. You think you're special because you don't talk? He smirked. Trust me. I've dealt with guys like you before. Steven exhaled slowly. Not in fear. In patience. If you were standing there, would you have walked away or stood your ground? The man cracked his knuckles. That was the moment. The exact second when the situation crossed from words into something else. Steven shifted his feet, just slightly. Barely noticeable. But to someone who knew what to look for, it meant everything. Because the setup was complete. And the man had no idea. He wasn't provoking a stranger. He was waking something. That had been quiet. On purpose. The air felt heavier now. Not because anyone had moved. But because everyone had felt it. That invisible line had been crossed. The man stood right in front of Steven, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. He smelled of arrogance and cheap confidence. His friends had gone quiet, suddenly unsure whether this was still entertainment or something else. Steven didn't back away. He didn't step forward either. He simply stood there. Calm. Balanced. Waiting. That stillness irritated the man more than any insult ever could. You deaf, he snapped. I'm talking to you. Steven met his eyes. I heard you, he said calmly. The man laughed, but it came out strained. Oh good, he said. Then you should hear this. He turned slightly so the room could see him. Performative. Showy. Guys like you always think being quiet makes you dangerous, he continued. But I can tell, there's nothing behind those eyes. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Steven said nothing. Do you think silence is power or weakness? Type power or weakness in the comments. The man rolled his shoulders and stepped even closer. You know what I see, he whispered. Fear. That word hung in the air. Steven's expression didn't change. But his breathing did. Slower. Deeper. Controlled. The man mistook that control for submission. He reached out and poked Steven's chest with 2 fingers. Not hard. Just disrespectful. Gasps broke out around them. Steven looked down at the fingers. Then back up at the man. You shouldn't do that, Steven said quietly. The warning was clear. The man grinned. Oh yeah. And what are you gonna do about it? Steven didn't answer. The man shoved him. This time, hard enough to make it real. Steven slid back half a step. Nothing more. The room froze. The man threw his hands up, laughing loudly. See, he shouted. I told you. He's got nothing. But that half-step wasn't weakness. It was adjustment. Steven's stance settled perfectly. Feet grounded. Center aligned. To trained eyes, it was unmistakable. To everyone else, it looked like nothing. At this point, would you step in or keep watching? Comment step in or watch. The man was fully convinced now. He leaned forward, smug, careless. That's it, he mocked. Is that all you've got? Steven raised his eyes. For the first time, there was no softness in them. Only focus. Only intent. Only calm violence waiting for permission. The man lifted his arm again. That was the moment. Not when he insulted him. Not when he laughed. Not even when he shoved him. But when he raised his hand. Because Steven Seagal didn't react to words. He reacted to threats. Time slowed. The noise of the room faded into a distant hum. Steven's body moved, not fast, not slow, but precise. Calculated. Deliberate. The man's eyes widened, just slightly. Too late. He had just learned the most dangerous lesson of all. The quiet ones aren't quiet because they're weak. They're quiet because they don't need to prove anything. And in the next heartbeat, everyone in that room was about to understand exactly how brutal that truth could be. It happened faster than anyone expected, but slower than anyone would forget. The man's arm came up, half threat, half show. He wasn't even trying to punch yet. That was his last mistake. Steven moved. Not explosively. Not wildly. Precisely. One step forward. A slight turn of the shoulders. The man felt it before he understood it. Steven's hand snapped out, not with rage, but with purpose, redirecting the raised arm effortlessly, like it weighed nothing. In the same motion, Steven closed the distance. Too close. The man's confident grin vanished. There was no time to react. Steven's elbow drove in, short, brutal, perfectly placed. Not flashy. Not dramatic. Effective. The sound wasn't loud, but the effect was devastating. Air exploded out of the man's lungs as his body folded instinctively. His eyes bulged, mouth open, trying to breathe, failing. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Someone screamed. Steven didn't stop. He never did. As the man staggered, Steven controlled his balance with one hand, guiding him, not slamming, not throwing, guiding him exactly where he wanted. Then came the sweep. Clean. Effortless. Merciless. The man's feet left the ground. His back hit the floor with a heavy final thud that shook the room. Silence. Absolute silence. Did you expect Steven to react like that? Type yes or no. The man tried to move. Tried. Steven was already there. One knee down. One hand on the wrist. Pressure applied, not enough to break, just enough to remind. The man groaned. Pain finally replacing arrogance. Steven leaned in, his voice calm enough that only the man could hear. "This is where you stop," he said quietly. The man nodded frantically. Too late to speak. Too late to act tough. Around them, no one moved. No laughter. No phones raised anymore. No cheers. Just shock. At this moment, would you step back in fear or stand frozen? Comment fear or frozen. Steven stood up slowly and stepped away. He gave the man space. A chance. That alone should have ended it. But humiliation is louder than pain. The man, shaking and red-faced, forced himself up on one elbow. Rage burned in his eyes, embarrassment turning into stupidity. "You think," he coughed, struggling, "you think that makes you tough?" The crowd inhaled sharply. Steven stopped. Turned back. This time, there was no warning. No words. Just motion. Steven closed the distance again, but now the room could see the difference. This wasn't defense anymore. This was a lesson. He caught the man's collar and twisted, using his own momentum against him. The man barely left the ground before being redirected into the nearest table. Wood cracked. Glasses shattered. People jumped back. Should Steven stop here, or finish it? The man slid to the floor, gasping, coughing, completely broken, not unconscious, but undeniably defeated. Steven stepped back once more. Hands relaxed again. Breathing steady. As if nothing had happened. The contrast was terrifying. Security finally rushed in, shouting, scrambling, unsure who to grab. But when they saw the man on the floor, and Steven standing calm, untouched, they hesitated. One guard whispered, "What did he even do?" Another replied, "Enough." Steven glanced around the room. Eyes met eyes. No anger. No pride. Just calm authority. He adjusted his jacket. And for the first time since it all began, he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some people mistake patience for weakness," he said. "They only learn after it's gone." Was the man warned enough times, Or did he deserve it sooner? Type warned or sooner in the comments. Steven turned away. And as the sound slowly returned to the room, whispers, shock, disbelief. Everyone understood the same truth at the same time. They hadn't just witnessed a fight. They had witnessed what happens when someone underestimates the wrong man. For a moment, no one moved. The man lay on the floor, coughing, clutching his side, his earlier confidence completely erased. Tables were broken. Glass crunched under people's shoes. The room smelled of spilled drinks and panic. Steven Seagal stood a few steps away. Calm. Untouched. Almost distant. Security guards circled uncertainly, hands hovering near their radios. They had rushed in expecting chaos. Two men fighting, shouting, swinging wildly. But that wasn't what they saw. They saw one man broken, and another standing like nothing had happened. The guards looked at each other. Who started it? One asked. The room stayed quiet. Then a voice spoke up from the crowd. He did, a woman said, pointing at the man on the floor. He kept provoking him. Another person nodded. He warned him. More than once. More voices joined in. He shoved him first. He wouldn't stop. We all saw it. The guards exchanged looks again. The story was already clear. If you were a witness, would you speak up or stay silent? Comment speak up or stay silent. The man on the floor tried to laugh, but it came out as a wheeze. They're lying, he said weakly. He attacked me. Steven didn't respond. He didn't need to. One of the guards crouched down beside the man. Sir, can you stand? The man tried. Pain shot through him, and he collapsed back down with a groan. That answer was enough. The guards turned their attention to Steven now. Sir, one of them said cautiously, we're going to need you to stay here for a moment. Steven nodded. Of course. No resistance. No excuses. That calmness unsettled them more than anger ever could. People whispered. Who is he? How did he do that? He didn't even look angry. Someone pulled out a phone again, but this time not to laugh. To record. Do you think real strength is loud or quiet? Type loud or quiet. Moments later, the doors opened again. This time, not security. Authority. Two uniformed officers stepped inside, scanning the scene. Broken furniture. A man injured. A crowd full of witnesses. One officer approached Steven. Sir, can you tell us what happened? Steven spoke calmly, clearly. I was threatened. I was touched without consent. I defended myself. Then I stopped. Nothing more. Nothing less. The officer nodded slowly. He turned to the crowd. Anyone want to add to that? Hands went up. One by one, people confirmed Steven's story. Even the bartender spoke up. So did the staff. The man on the floor realized it then. He wasn't the victim. He was the example. His voice cracked as he spoke again. I didn't know, he said. I thought he was just some quiet guy. Steven finally looked at him. That's the mistake, Steven said. And it's a dangerous one. Should ignorance excuse behavior like this? Comment yes or no. The officers made their decision. One stayed with the injured man. The other stepped aside with Steven. You're free to go, the officer said. This was self-defense. A ripple of disbelief passed through the crowd. Steven nodded politely. As he turned to leave, something unexpected happened. Applause. Soft at first. Then louder. Not cheering. Acknowledgement. Respect. Steven paused. He didn't smile. He didn't bow. He simply raised one hand slightly, just enough to say enough, and the room quieted again. The man on the floor watched it all. Every clap felt heavier than any strike. Do you think public humiliation hurts more than physical pain? Type humiliation or pain. As Steven walked toward the exit, someone called out. Hey, what's your name? Steven stopped. Turned slightly. Steven, he said. Nothing else. The doors closed behind him. Outside, The noise of the world continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside that room, something had shifted. People talked differently now. They stood a little straighter. They spoke a little softer. Because they had learned something they wouldn't forget. Not about fighting. Not about violence. But about underestimation. What's more dangerous, arrogance or calm confidence? Because the truth is simple. The most brutal people aren't always loud. They don't announce themselves. They don't posture. They wait. And by the time you realize who they are, it's already too late. By the time the doors closed behind Steven, the room was quiet again. Not the uncomfortable silence from before, but a thoughtful one. People stood where they were, replaying the moment in their minds. The broken table. The man on the floor. The calm figure who had walked away without pride or celebration. Someone finally said what everyone was thinking. I didn't expect that. And that was the point. Steven Seagal never looked like what people imagined danger to be. No shouting. No threats. No need to prove anything. And yet, when the moment came, he was the most controlled and the most capable person in the room. The injured man was helped to his feet by security, leaning heavily, humbled in a way no lecture could ever achieve. His eyes never left the exit where Steven had disappeared. For the first time, he understood something painful. The world doesn't warn you before it teaches you. Have you ever underestimated someone, or been underestimated yourself? Comment me or them. Around the room, conversations started quietly. He stayed calm the whole time. He gave him chances. He didn't enjoy it. Those words mattered. Because real strength doesn't celebrate violence. It controls it. Steven hadn't walked in looking for dominance. He didn't leave with trophies or applause. He left with respect. And respect is heavier than fear. The lesson lingered long after he was gone. People remembered how fast arrogance collapsed. How quickly laughter turned into silence. How calm presence outweighed loud confidence. Do you believe self-control is stronger than raw strength? Type control or strength. The man who underestimated him learned the hardest lesson of all. It wasn't the pain that stayed with him. It was the realization that he had created his own downfall. No one forced him. No one trapped him. Every warning was there. He ignored them. And the cost was public, permanent, and unforgettable. Steven's final words echoed in more than just that room. Some people mistake patience for weakness. That sentence followed everyone home. Because it applies everywhere. In offices. In relationships. In everyday life. The quiet person in the corner. The one who doesn't interrupt. The one who doesn't argue back. They may not be weak. They may simply be disciplined. Do you think society respects loud confidence more than quiet strength? Comment loud or quiet. As the story spread, retold by witnesses, clipped by phones, exaggerated and simplified, one detail stayed consistent. Steven Seagal never raised his voice. And that detail changed how people saw power. True power doesn't chase attention. It doesn't humiliate. It doesn't need to win arguments. It waits. And when it moves with purpose. So the next time you feel tempted to test someone just because they seem calm, pause. Because the most dangerous people aren't the ones who shout. They're the ones who stay silent until action is necessary. If you believe humility, patience, and self-control are real strength, type respect in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment. Because underestimating others doesn't make you strong. Understanding yourself does. By the next morning, the story had already spread. Not because of exaggeration. Not because of rumors. But because people couldn't stop talking about one thing. How fast respect had been lost. And how quietly it had been taken back. Those who were there remembered the same detail. Steven Seagal didn't look proud. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look satisfied. He just looked done. As if the situation had ended the moment the lesson was delivered. The man who underestimated him didn't sleep that night. Pain faded. Bruises healed. But the memory stayed sharp. He replayed the moment again and again. The laughter, The shove, the crowd, the silence afterward. Not the strike hurt the most. It was the realization. He hadn't been defeated by strength. He had been defeated by self-control. Which hurts more, losing a fight, or losing your dignity? The next few days were different for everyone involved. The witnesses told the story with a new tone. Not excitement. Not drama. Respect. Some admitted something quietly to themselves. I would have done the same thing. I've judged people like that before. I didn't know calm could be so dangerous. Steven, meanwhile, returned to his normal life. No interviews. No statements. No explanations. Because people who truly understand power never feel the need to explain it. That silence was louder than any headline. And that's where the real lesson lived. We live in a world that celebrates noise. Loud confidence. Public dominance. Instant reactions. But that night proved something different. The most brutal force isn't chaos. It's discipline. Do you believe discipline is a form of power? Type yes or no. The man who mocked learned something he would never forget. You don't test strangers just because they look quiet. You don't assume weakness just because someone doesn't respond. And you never confuse patience with fear. Because some people spend their entire lives training themselves to stay calm. And when that calm breaks, it breaks with precision. Steven didn't change that man's life with violence. He changed it with consequence. And consequences last longer than pain. The story slowly faded from conversations, but the behavior it corrected did not. People spoke softer after that. Listened longer. Reacted slower. Not because they were afraid of Steven Seagal, but because they understood something deeper. Everyone is fighting battles you cannot see. Have you ever stayed calm when you could have reacted? The final truth is simple. The most dangerous people are rarely the loudest. They don't threaten. They don't boast. They wait. They observe. They choose when to act. And when they do, it's never by accident. Steven Seagal walked away that night without applause. But he left behind something stronger than fear. A reminder that respect given freely is always cheaper than respect demanded by force. If you believe true strength is calm, controlled, and disciplined, type respect in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from. I reply to as many as I can. Because underestimating others doesn't make you powerful. Understanding restraint does.